Good evening. This is Brooke Baker, the Director of Finance and Operations, and welcome to the final budget presentation for the 2024-2025 school year. During tonight's agenda, I will take you through the budget calendar and timeline. We will present the revenue and expenditure details, review the district's tax information and the impact to the taxpayers, and we will go over our long-term projections before summarizing and returning back to our Finance Committee meeting. The budget calendar is driven by dates established by the state under Act 1 of 2006. This legislation has two main objectives. First, it limits school districts on how much they can raise property taxes by providing them a cost of living index. The second is that they provide direct property tax relief to homeowners with gambling revenue. To receive the tax relief, there are important dates the taxpayer will need to follow. Applications are mailed out to homeowners by December 31st of each year by the Allegheny County Assessment Office. The taxpayer must fill out these forms and return them back to the assessment office by March 1st for it to be applicable for the year's tax rebate effective July 1st. By May 1st, the Pennsylvania Department of Education notifies the district of the amount of their state allocation of property tax reduction funding. The district then applies the tax relief on tax bills that are mailed for the July 1st of each year. The district began their budget timeline in September when they received notification of their cost of living index for the upcoming budget year. For the 24-25 school year, our index is 5.3%, which means that the district cannot raise taxes above the 5.3% without seeking the voter referendum. Shortly after receiving our index, we started our budget calendar and the Finance Committee started preparation for the 24-25 budget. During the months of October and November, Mr. Antolin and I met and reviewed a structural budget to ensure the district did not need to exceed the 5.3% index set by the state. At our December 5th board meeting, the board approved the resolution that the district would not exceed the index for the 24-25 budget year. I did want to note that due to the presidential election coming up in this fall, the Act 1 timeline was altered and the resolution was due earlier than normal. Once the resolution was approved on December 5th, we immediately moved into the preparation of our proposed final budget, which was presented and adopted on April 16th. Lastly, we're here tonight to present the final budget, with the final budget to be adopted on May 21st. Here we have our final budget summary, which you can see we don't have any adjustments from when we presented last month on April 16th. Our revenues are $60,658,148, which includes a 2.9% tax increase, bringing Quaker Valley's millage rate to 21.2362 mils. The expenditures for the 24-25 budget year is $60,659,277, which we will go into more detail in upcoming slides. This pie chart shows a breakdown of how we will fund our operating budget with local, state, and federal funds. As you can see, Quaker Valley relies heavily on local sources, which makes up over 82%. A little over 16.5% comes from state funding and less than 1% comes from federal funding. This slide shows a breakdown of our local revenue. Starting with the lines that are orange, these represent revenues that come from real estate taxes. This includes current real estate taxes collected at discount, face, and penalty, interim taxes, and delinquent real estate taxes. These three lines make up almost 83% of local revenue. Moving to the lines that are highlighted blue are revenues driven by earned income taxes and delinquent earned income taxes. These make up almost 12% of local revenue. This is why it is important that we continue to track and review our real estate and earned income tax reports at our Finance Committee meetings because they are a very crucial part of our revenue budget for the district. I do want to make a note that there was a change between the proposed final budget to the final budget on the real estate line. On May 1st, we received our property relief funding from the state, which was an increase from the 23-24 school year. You will see an increase in our state funding and then a decrease to our local real estate line because the property relief credit to the taxpayer will be higher. However, our bottom numbers have not changed. This page references our budgeted real estate assessment and the property tax relief to the approved taxpayers. The first column shows the real estate assessed value for Quaker Valley. As you can see, the assessed values have continually increased over the past 8 years, and for the 24-25 school year, the growth has increased by a little over 1%. The district was notified on May 1st that our property relief funding allocation would be $1,036,942 for the 24-25 school year, and that 3,623 parcels have been approved. Our allocation has increased by almost 23% over the prior year. The state has indicated that this increase is sustainable for the next 5 years to help cut taxes for those living in Pennsylvania. The amount of the assessed value of the homestead farmstead exclusion is $13,477.50. This amount will be deducted of the taxpayer's total assessed value. So the column that is highlighted yellow is the amount of the credit, which is $286.21. This credit is an increase of $52.34 from the prior year. Although the district only sees a shift of funding from local to state, the taxpayers who are approved for the exclusion will see a larger credit, reducing the impact of the 2.9% tax increase. Looking at the details from our second largest revenue source, here is our earned income tax history. We have seen a steady increase since the 17-18 school year with a few aberrations. In the 2021 school year, this aberration was due to the first full year of COVID. However, you can see that the 21-22 school year, we saw a larger increase. This was due to payments that were for the 2021 school year but were delayed and received in the 21-22 school year. So these 2 years are blended because of COVID. The 22-23 school year also had an aberration, and this was due to high incentives earned by local wage earners within that year. We are projecting our collections for the 23-24 school year to be closer to the collections of school year 21-22, but we are confident that the EIT is now leveling out, but will continue to watch collections closely since this is the district's second biggest local revenue source. Here is a look at our state revenue, which include both direct subsidies and reimbursements from the state. Highlighted in orange is our primary subsidies, basic education, special education, and ready to learn. I want to point out if you look on the line of the basic education subsidy, it is showing an increase of a little over $420,000 from the prior year. This is comparing the budget of this upcoming school year to the budget of last year. When we approved the budget last year, the state's budget was not passed, and very rarely does it get passed by June 30th when ours is due. So when we budgeted for our basic education funding for the 23-24 school year, we were conservative since our district doesn't rely heavily on state funding. When we received our allocation for the 23-24 school year, it was a little over $2.5 million, and for the 24-25 school year, we're projecting a little over $2.6 million. So the increase from 23-24 actual to 24-25 budget is a little over $71,000. The state budget has not been approved for the 24-25 fiscal year, therefore we will be budgeting conservatively just as we did last year. Moving to the item that is highlighted in yellow, this is our property tax reduction allocation as I spoke in prior slides. This is where the money was shifted from the local real estate line to the state funding line. You can see that this increase of a little over $192,000 from the prior year. The state uses financial aid ratios and other demographic information to calculate how much each school district receives in subsidies and reimbursements. Here we have a list of all the Allegheny schools, which lists their aid ratios for market value and personal income. If you look at the bottom, you will see that Quaker Valley, which is highlighted in yellow, has the lowest aid ratio in the county, and it falls in the lowest Act 1 index. This translates to the dependency on local taxation that we always speak about. I did want to note that districts with higher aid ratios also receive an adjustment to their Act 1 inflationary index. For example, take a look at Mount Lebanon, who is one of our peer schools. They have an Act 1 index of 6.2%, which is higher than Quaker Valley's 5.3%. Here is a look at our federal revenues history and what is expected for the 24-25 school year. Even though federal funding is less than 1% for Quaker Valley, it still helps us fund our federal programs that are currently in place for reading, class size reduction, and English second language learners. The funding also helps continue our Access program that is in place, which provides resources for our special education program. The one area I would like to note is what is highlighted in orange, which has been the pandemic money that we have received over the past few years. This funding ends at the end of 23-24, therefore that is why 24-25 is budgeted at zero. This pie chart is the projected expenditures for the 24-25 school year. As you can see, salary and benefits are the two largest expenses, making up more than 67% of the budget. The next biggest expense is our debt service, which is a little less than 11% of the budget. The debt service is our capital investments that we have made to our buildings. As for the other categories, we'll go into more detail in the upcoming slide. Here we have our budget summary for our expenditures, which are broken down by budget categories and departments. First, we'll start off with departments and categories that are seeing an increase. The salary and benefits line makes up 67% of the budget and has gone up 5.1% since last year. This is relative to contractual obligations, adding an additional police officer and 9% increase in health insurance benefits. The benefits also include PSERS pension costs, which we will break down further in an upcoming slide. Moving down to debt service in the fund transfer lines, these two lines are for the new high school, along with funding the capital projects that are in our 5-year capital plan. We have increased the transfer line because we anticipate inflationary costs associated with construction. The high school, middle school, and both elementaries are seeing an increase due to inflationary costs of the products and supplies. Now moving to the student service budget. This department is seeing over a 22% increase from the prior year. This is due to additional services needed for some of our students. Another reason is for increase for our district-wide social worker. I do want to note that we have a grant to fund this position for the next 2 years, so even though you see this large increase in the student service budget, the majority of the increase is covered by the grant. We do have 2 additional students who need to be placed outside the district who require additional services. Therefore, our outside placement budget has increased from the prior year. Our Parkway budget has also increased, and this is due to the increase in enrollment that we have been seeing. For the facilities budget, we're seeing the biggest inflationary increase in costs for cleaning and building supplies, and also for contracted maintenance services. The increases to the transportation budget are contractual increases and for the extra transportation that will be needed for additional outside placements. There are 2 areas we're seeing decreases. First, under contracted substitutes, these are lower now that we are seeing less absences. The other decrease is in charter school payments because we are seeing less students attending charter schools, which we will talk more about in the upcoming slide. We are now going to take a closer look at a few of those cost drivers that are associated with the unfunding and underfunded mandates. Starting with the state pension payments, these pension payments to the public school employees retirement system has significantly increased over the years. PSERS represents 14% of our budget, and the PSERS cost represents over 33% of the tax increases that we put in place since the 14-15 school year. For special education costs, which represents 12% of our total budget, Quaker Valley's current state and federal funding for special education covers less than 25% of the costs associated with providing services to our special education students. We also look at charter school payments because of the unfair funding formula that is currently in place. The district pays over $20,000 for regular education students and over $39,000 for special education students who choose to go to charter schools with no direct funding from the state to offset these costs. There is a proposal to change this unfair funding formula to a flat rate in the governor's proposal. We are hoping that this unfair funding formula will be changed in the future. Here is the historical cost for our pension obligations. You will see from the 16-17 school year up to the current year 23-24, costs have increased from $5.7 million to $7.9 million. We are projecting our future obligations, which the projection for the 31-32 school year is $11.7 million. Here is a more detailed look into our historical PSERS costs. The employer rate, which you can find in the second column, is a percentage that is applied to our total payroll. We do receive a state reimbursement of 50% of actual costs, which is shown in our state revenues budget. The net increase to the district is shown in the last column, and as stated in prior slides, that this annual increases represent over 33% of the overall tax increase since the 14-15 school year. Here's a clear picture of how the state and federal funding are not keeping up with our special education expenditures, which are set in a student's individualized education plan. The green bars represent those increasing costs that we have been seeing year after year. Below, highlighted in purple, red, and blue, are the state and federal funding that are received for special education programs. To fill this significant gap, the district has to rely on local tax dollars. Moving into charter school costs versus funding, this graph shows the cost of the district from the 11-12 school year to our projections for 23-24. We have been fortunate that this line item has been generally flat and stable except for the year showing a spike in 2021, which was during COVID. That bottom red line represents the charter subsidies that we have received from the state, which is zero. The state did help fund these costs prior to the 10-11 school year, which was a reimbursement of approximately 30% of the expense. The bottom line is we can't control who chooses to attend charter schools, therefore the district has to pay the full amount since the state no longer helps with these costs, which in return puts the burden on the local taxes. Here's a recap of our expenditure budget. Salary and benefits alone represents 67% of our total budget. Unfunded and underfunded mandates continue to drive local tax dollars. We have planned for the high school project along with capital improvements to our facilities, which is factored into our long-term planning, which we will go over in the upcoming slides. But first, let's take a look at our current tax effort. The local tax effort is the primary source to pay for the expenditure budget. However, Quaker Valley remains ranked in the bottom third of the county. There also is the equalized millage metric, which expresses tax rates as a percentage of the market value. It is used to provide realistic comparisons of actual market value taxing efforts across district lines. Generally, high equalized mills represents a higher tax burden than low equalized mills. Quaker Valley ranks in the lowest quartile when comparing equalized mills taxing efforts. We are able to show the taxing effort on this comparative data chart. Quaker Valley is highlighted in yellow so you can see where we are ranked among our peer schools in Allegheny County relative to millage rate and equalized mills, so even with a 2.9% tax increase, we do remain near the bottom relative to our tax level and tax effort. Now that we reviewed the budget details for the 24-25 school year, we can now look at our long-term budget projections, which includes operational and financing costs associated with the new high school, includes capital needs for all of our current facilities. This includes maintaining high-performing school programs and services. Our strategic long-term planning ensures that we will have sight to paying for the significant investment of the new high school without crowding out the funds necessary to maintain existing buildings and educational programs. Here are our long-term budget projections for expenditures. These projections do include a cost of living increase with historical trends in all departments and categories. I would like to highlight the areas that are associated with the high school project. First, we'll take a look at debt service and the fund transfer lines. These two lines are where we're building the capacity to pay for all the capital improvements of the district and the debt service associated to the new high school. Each year, Mr. Gauthier presents a 5-year capital plan to adjust these needs of all of our buildings. We do anticipate our capital plan to be fully funded and the progression to the debt service line associated with the school opening. The money on these two lines may shift in the future depending on when we need to borrow that money. This could depend on project timeline, cash flow needs, and market rates. This does show a base projection of where the debt service is likely to land. Moving down to facilities and building utility budgets, you will see a progression of expenses in these two categories relative to the square footage that is associated with the new high school facility. The next line down to transportation, this includes extra shuttle runs from the new high school to the existing stadium facility. All the revenue categories are projected based on historical trends, with the exception of one being under the federal source. As I spoke in the beginning of this presentation, that our funding that we received for the pandemic has ended, therefore future projections will remain at zero. With a new high school, we're projecting an increase in community and private use of the facilities, which will increase the rental income, which is located under the local revenues. Since our future revenue budget relies on local taxes, let's take a look at those projected millage rates. Here are the long-term budget projections pertaining to our millage rates. Nothing new here since we have been posting these long-term millage projections ever since June of 2022, which we have continually updated according to current budget trends and project estimates. This chart includes a historical look at both the tax rate and the Act 1 inflationary index to note our district trends. You will see that our future tax rate increases, which include funding for both our operational and financing for our high school project, is projected to stay under the Cost of Living Act 1 index. Our historical look does show that the average tax increase for operational needs has been around 2% a year for the last 14 plus years. And as projected, the next several years are likely to include an incremental difference of 0.9 to 1.4% to contribute to our capital investment of the new high school. Yet all these tax increases are still projected to remain under the Act 1 index. Here is the 2024-2025 final budget summary. The budget does include a 2.9% increase in real estate taxes, which is less than the Act 1 inflationary index permitted by law. Owners of a $200,000 home would pay $10.14 more per month in property taxes. However, for those owners of a $200,000 home that have been approved for the homestead exclusion will receive a higher credit on their tax bill. Their net impact would be to pay $5.78 more per month in taxes. And lastly, the tax rate of 21.2362 mils remains in the lowest third in Allegheny County. I am happy to recommend our 2024-2025 final budget for adoption. Thank you for everyone's time and attention.